represent the diocese and the Catholic Church in meetings with other faiths and in local ecumenical gatherings. A parish youth and ministry team. 94.96% thought it appropriate to set up a diocesan team for youth ministry. The nurturing of our young people and their development in faith is clearly seen as a major priority by those responding to the consultation. It is a regrettable truth that many of our young people are distancing themselves from any formal expression of their faith, such as attendance at Mass and other religious services. At the same time, however, there is much energy displayed by young people in terms of their social concern and social action. The Caritas ambassadors in our schools, now numbering some 212, demonstrate an enthusiasm for projects concerning poverty and homelessness, and also stimulate interests and energy in their fellow pupils. Pupil members of chaplaincy teams, approximately 1,600, are also having an impact on schools, with formal prayer groups and discussion groups, and providing pastoral support to their peers. There is certainly no reason to believe that young people have no place in their lives for spirituality and gospel action. There are other groups, such as Reignite, Young Christian Workers and Night Fever, which engage young people's imaginations and activity. Our annual diocesan pilgrimage to Lourdes is supported by a large number of young people who volunteer to give their time and energy to take care of the sick and less mobile pilgrims. Our diocese has been involved with World Youth Days from the beginning, and always with a good response. Parish youth groups were much more common in decades past. One clear benefit from forming fewer, larger missionary parishes will be the possibility of renewing youth groups. A youth ministry team would, hopefully, be able to network the various initiatives that already exist, sharing the best practice. It could also invest in new initiatives, drawing on the experience of other youth teams from other dioceses. But it would be wrong to isolate our initiatives for the youth from the essential centre of our religious experience, which is the parish. Pope Francis is urgent in his request for a missionary spirit in our parishes, and we must see our communities as cohesive and integrated. There are certainly activities that may be organised specifically for our young people, but we should not think of our youth work as being in any way separate from the rest of our parish community. It is my intention to appoint 1 or 2 priests to oversee the development of missionary parishes in which a youth ministry must have a particular priority. This project must also, of course, connect with our schools so that the trinity of family, parish and school may be a unity of common evangelisation. Chaplaincies. Reducing the number of parishes to an optimal figure of 75 will also allow some flexibility for chaplaincy work. It is central to the pastoral ministry of any priest that he give time to the sick and, where required, to parishioners and other groups of particular need. Priests must also give time to school chaplaincy and to chaplaincy work, either full or part-time, to our many universities and colleges. While lay chaplaincies are to be valued in prisons, hospitals and schools, there is a need for priests to be available, especially for sacramental ministry. In some cases, this cannot simply be an aspect of ministry included in the portfolio of ministries within parish ministry. Some priests need to be fully available for chaplaincy work. These ministries lie at the heart of our service of the gospel. Vocations. There were a series of questions about vocations. Just 25.53% of people responding said that they had given thought to a vocation to the priesthood or the religious life for themselves. 74.47% had not done so. Just 14.94% of people had suggested directly to another person that they might seriously consider the priesthood or the religious life. Some people wondered why we had included these questions, or thought that this was too personal an area to raise in this questionnaire. However, the intention behind these questions was not to be intrusive, but to get some measure of the extent to which people reflect on vocation for themselves, and whether people are prepared to provoke discussion of the possibility with others. We need, I think, to cultivate a culture of vocation. God no doubt calls those whom he wishes to priesthood and religious life. Indeed, God calls people to many other vocations, particularly to marriage and indeed to the single life. There lies within us all a responsibility to ensure that those whom God calls should be alerted to hearing that call and to nurture rather than ignore it. It is important that young people especially should ask themselves the question, what is God asking of me? And this is not a question to be asked just once by young people, but should be repeated as they grow and mature. The question should not simply be addressed at school, but also within the context of the family, where parents are the first and best teachers of their children in the ways of the faith. The question should not be asked in isolation, but within a context of understanding the ministry of the priest and the purpose of religious life. If spoken about merely in isolation, then any reply will not be informed. We need also to speak of vocation in the wider sense, as understood by the Blessed John Henry Newman, who promotes the belief that everyone is created for a definite purpose, and we all must seek to discover that purpose for ourselves. It is certainly possible to develop a sense of discovering our vocation in our schools, but it cannot be solely there that such discussions are encouraged. Work is already being done to provide a better priority for the promotion of vocation, but I would urge everyone to consider how each one of us may better promote that sense of discovering what God may be asking of us. There are suggestions that, faced with the declining number of priests, we should look to import priests from elsewhere. While there should be no objection to having some priests from abroad and valuing the generosity of them being here, there are two particular reasons why this should not be seen as a resolution to the shortage of priests in the diocese. The main reason is that although many countries currently enjoying a very large number of vocations, they are growing churches in their own right, and the proportion of priests to people is still far lower than in England and Wales. Indeed, after Malta, we still have the highest ratio of priests to people in the world. It would be quite wrong, in my view, to draw priests away from their own national churches, where there is an even greater need for them. It is worthwhile thinking of the situation of Father Paul in Zimbabwe, who was mentioned earlier. Secondly, it is not necessarily healthy to bring priests from other cultures and traditions and expect them to suddenly assimilate into our own national culture. This is best done when a priest comes from abroad and lives in a community with other priests. That is not easy to arrange in our own situation, where it is very unusual to find even two priests living together in the same presbytery. One arrangement that could be mutually beneficial, and some bishops in other countries are actively considering an arrangement with this diocese. The arrangement would be to send one or two priests to this diocese for a fixed period of, say, 3 years, during which time the priest could have pastoral experience and perhaps undertake some studies. Those priests who understand the temporary nature of their appointment here and would return to their own diocese, perhaps to be replaced by others on the same terms. The arrangement would remain strictly between the bishops concerned. We must also acknowledge the important pastoral work of the ethnic chaplains, those priests who minister here to their own national communities, assisting many of the more recently arrived to find encouragement in their family style of liturgy and worship. Our Catholic schools. Our 208 schools and colleges are a wonderful legacy of the energy and enthusiasm of past generations. They are also an inestimable asset for the Catholic Church in the Salford of the future. We should be very proud of them. It was the generosity of past generations that wished to provide Catholic education for all Catholic children. It is right that they should remain a priority. There are, however, some complications. In some of our schools, the school roll has seen the rise of pupils from other faiths, noticeably Islam. Some schools, indeed, have only a minority of Catholic pupils. There was some question that we might hand over such schools to other education trusts. However, there is a real purpose in retaining such schools. We should welcome pupils into our schools, whether parents deliberately choose Catholic education and the Catholic ethos of education, even when they are from a different faith. It has long been the tradition of the Catholic Church to provide education to all comers, especially when, in missionary territories, the Church has opened the first schools in some of the world's poorest countries. Nor should we ignore a plea of the Second Vatican Council in the Decree on Education. This sacred council of the Church earnestly entreats pastors and all the faithful to spare no sacrifice in helping Catholic schools fulfil their function in a continually more perfect way, and especially in caring for the needs of all those who are poor in the goods of this world and who are deprived of the assistance and affection of a family, or who are strangers to the gifts of faith. Matters of education feature frequently in government legislation, and there are continual changes and new requirements and legislations. We must be very vigilant in protecting the heritage of our Catholic schools, and, while necessarily complying with all legislation, we must voice our concerns when our mission in education appears threatened or compromised by external influences. Wardley Hall. The question asked was, would you be happy for further investment to be made so that Wardley Hall and adjacent buildings can be open to greater usage by priests and people of the diocese? 82.05% were in favour. Wardley Hall was actually purchased by the diocese in 1930, not merely as a home for the bishop, but as part of a larger and necessary purchase to create a new cemetery, now, of course, St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cemetery, adjacent to the hall itself. That obligation and facility of our Roman Catholic community still exists and thrives to this day. There are various aspects to any consideration of Wardley Hall. In the first place, if we are to retain the hall, then we must take responsibility for a building which is now 500 years old. It is referred to in historical research as one of the finest of the minor halls of Lancashire. Such buildings need an ongoing programme of maintenance and repair. Whether we consider expanding its use or not, we are responsible for the building's good repair, and that is, in itself, costly. The hall is not just a building of historic interest. The presence of a major relic, the skull of St. Ambrose Barlow, and the Catholic associations with the building over the centuries make it a place of religious significance, and indeed a place of pilgrimage. Added to that is the need for us to maintain the sacred nature of our cemetery for our families and their deceased loved ones. Given the proximity of the stables and the gatehouse, there are opportunities to create better facilities for the welcoming of visitors and the accommodation of small meetings and conferences. With some adaptation, there could be a